Homestyle beef stew. Okay, I made this one yesterday for dinner. I made this one fresh, and I usually like do all of my recipes as freezer meals. But I was like, you know what? Sometimes I like to go on and I like to make fresh slow cooker recipes, so why don't I just post a video of me making this Homestyle beef stew recipe fresh? And man, within the first 24 hours, it got like 200,000 views. And I was like, dang, okay. Fresh slow cooker recipes are the exact same thing as freezer recipes. You just had to spend time making it that day. We'll start with the beef. All right, which one is my Homestyle beef stew? So I am going to need to cut this beef in half, and I do not want to do it on the same surface that I'm prepping everything else. So I'm going to take it over here, cut it in half on a separate space, and then I'm going to put it in. Just walk around my house with some, oh gosh, it's right here. Okay. So I got to wash my hand, obviously, right after I stick this in there. All right, I tend to leave all the things open. This is beef chuck roast. It is my favorite type of meat to use in the slow cooker because when it cooks all day for like 8 to 10 hours, it is extremely tender, it falls apart, and you basically feel like you paid a bunch of money for a really nice roast. Every time you make a roast, I would recommend using beef chuck as your meat. Here we are adding in baby carrots, 1 bag. All of these recipes are going into the freezer. I hate cutting onions. So there's 2 things I do when it comes to cutting onions. 1, I will use the full star chopper, and it is the most incredible chopper for fresh onions that I've ever used. But the other thing I like to do, especially if I am freezing something or putting it in the slow cooker, is to use frozen diced onions because they're already done for me. So 1 onion, or like a half an onion, is usually about 1 cup. 1 cup of frozen onions going in. Cool. I am going to add in my seasoning mix. Freeze. Yes, you can. And the best way to freeze potatoes is to make sure they do not oxidize. When I am cutting and peeling potatoes, I always keep a bowl, a large bowl next to me when I'm doing the potatoes, of cold water, and it's full. And that way, as I cut and peel and dice those potatoes up, before I put them in the freezer bag, I put them in the water. And it prevents them from being exposed to the air, which is what you get the browning effect on. So you absolutely can freeze potatoes, and they don't have to get brown and they don't have to look gross. All you got to do is make sure that they get exposed to the oxygen as little as possible. I'm now adding a 6-ounce can of tomato paste right into the bag. That thing comes in handy for this. All right, I like adding parsnips instead of potatoes to my beef stew. Now you are welcome to add potatoes into this instead of parsnips, but I find that parsnips have a little bit of a, uh-oh, my peeler. I have had problems finding my peeler. Seems to be the one thing that disappears and goes into different cabinets. Parsnips tend to have a lower glycemic index, which is why I like putting them in my beef stew, just to kind of lower the sugars that go in there. But you can totally use potatoes. One easy way of doing potatoes is to buy the 1.5 pounds of petite potatoes, and then you don't have to peel them, you don't have to cut them. You can just rinse them off and throw them in your freezer meal, which is the easiest way to prevent any browning on your potatoes because you didn't even have to do anything. I'm all about finding hacks and little ways to make the meal prep process as easy as possible. That is the vibe that I am always going for. I feel like I should move some of this so that you can see better. I am just cutting up my parsnips right now. I've contemplated pulling out the chopper, but I just don't know if I want to take the time to do that right now. Parsnips basically have a starchy flavor similar to potatoes. It's almost like the mix of a regular potato with a like the mix of a regular potato, but with less starch. Man, I'm not answering your question well, right? Everyone that eats this thinks it's potatoes. It tastes like a potato. It's got a little bit less flavor, and it's not gonna get as mushy when it cooks. It's gonna hold its shape a little bit better. Great substitute, especially if you have somebody who has special dietary restrictions and can't have as many potatoes. Highly recommend. Okay, what else we got going on? So we have our apple cider vinegar. Favorite brand is Bragg. Oh my goodness, love this stuff. It's great for my favorite dressing to do on coleslaw is it's a vinaigrette, and it's like half olive oil, half apple cider vinegar. I have made it with off brands of this, but this is by far the best apple cider vinegar, especially if you're going to use it outside of cooking and freshen recipes. How many tablespoons? 2 tablespoons. I almost went crazy with a third there. Got all that in there. Last but not least, we got our asparagus. So we've added into this recipe our seasonings, which includes our garlic powder, bay leaves, thyme, parsley, salt, and pepper. So now I'm just adding in my veggies. I'm gonna dice these up. Would you like a fantastic tip when it comes to your leftovers for asparagus and carrots and onions? This is my biggest tip when it comes to these leftovers. So obviously, like, I'm not gonna use these in the recipe. I chopped off the ends, like the tip and the end, I always chop off. And I rinse my stuff when it comes home. And then I'm just gonna use this part and dice it up and put it into the recipe. But what a waste. Nobody wants to waste food, right? We have enough wasted food in this world. And so one fantastic way that you can use your like peels from carrots, when you peel a carrot, I'm just throwing things on the floor now, or your ends from the celery, or like if you were to cut this whole big thing off, the other best way to use it is for broth. So I get a freezer bag, I put all my ends and leftovers into that freezer bag, and when it's full, it's time to make broth. And you can make veggie broth with it. You can make chicken broth or beef broth. I love to make chicken broth after we get a rotisserie chicken. It's just a great, great, great way to keep things from going to waste. And then you don't have to buy broth, and it actually tastes way better. And always include a bay leaf in your broth. Very important, very important. All right, we got the beef, the garlic, the onion, the tomato paste, the carrots, the celery, the seasonings, the apple cider vinegar. Now this recipe calls for a can of chicken broth, but I'm not adding that into this bag. As you can see, the bag is already quite full. I am going to have to do some magic to make sure we can fit this all in there. If you were to add the chicken broth in here, it just gets a little overfull. So I have my can of chicken broth, and this is what I'm gonna add to my recipe after I'm cooking it. But when I'm going to freeze it, I just stick it in there. The broth. So yeah, I throw in those veggies, especially if I'm just gonna make veggie broth. Let's say my gallon bag is full and it's got onions, carrots, and celery leftovers in it. Once it's full, I take it out of the freezer. I'm gonna actually put these in it now. I take it out of the freezer, I fill up water as high as I want it to go. I add in salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and I let it cook all day long. You can do that on the stovetop if you're gonna be home. You can also do that in a crock pot if you're not gonna be home, and you get the best broth. I mean, it tastes way better than normal broth. I have not made broth in a while because I'm refilling my bag. So I did have to buy broth for these, but I'm telling you, it is so good. And if you want to make really good bone broth, it's a great way. You add all that stuff plus chicken bones, beef broth, you know, a beef bone. Next, what are we making? Enchilada bowls. This is a vegetarian freezer meal.